If you follow the world of longevity, you've probably come across Brian Johnson and his Rejuvenation Olympics leaderboard. Brian claims to have a brain that's aging at 1 speed. This is all supposedly determined by a type of testing called biological age testing. I ran 7 different biological age and cellular health tests on the same day at the same time to understand the variation between the different report types. In this video, I'm going to break down what my protocol was, the necessary context around it, and then I'll show you a glimpse into each of the different reports I got back so that you can decide if you want to try biological age testing or pass. First of all, what even is biological age testing? Simply put, it's a way of determining how well your internals are functioning compared to your calendar age, also called chronological age. If your biological age is less than your calendar age, you're considered to be doing well. Conversely, if your biological age is older than your calendar age, you have the ability to make some tweaks and adapt your lifestyle to bring it back into an optimal range so that you live longer and with a higher quality of life. Now, there are several different technologies and approaches to quantifying your so-called biological age. The underlying techniques used to approximate that number, as well as the samples they require and the cost between each varies. In my testing, I used a company called TruDiagnostic and their TruAge product, as well as their TruHealth product. I also used a company called GlycanAge. I used another test called AgeRate, then one called TruMe Labs. I also used Viome's full body intelligence panel, as well as standard blood work through a company called Function Health. While none of the companies sponsored this video, they did provide me the testing kits for free. They also provided codes for their test. If you guys want to give them a shot, you can find them in the description of this video, as well as the reports and the case study I wrote up, and even the interactive dashboard I built if you want to go deeper into any one particular facet of this. I took these tests back in March 2025, just 5 days after I completed my first 2-day dry fast. I did a dry fast because it's considered a very extreme lifestyle intervention, and I wanted to see how responsive these tests are to major lifestyle changes. Then I cut out all supplements and intense exercise a couple days before my first blood draw. On the first day, I went to Function Health at 10 a.m., got my blood drawn. Second day, same thing, they required 2 blood draws, so I got those back to back. And then I submitted all my samples around the same time later that afternoon. I did this to minimize variability so that all of the labs were receiving pretty much the same samples. All right, let's now dive into the reports I received after submitting these samples. The first one we have is the TruDiagnostic TruAge report. This is one of the classics in the space and widely considered to be the most accurate and most reputable. You can see that my biological age via these 2 main algorithms, clocks, tests were slightly lower than my chronological age, and we'll see a breakdown of what goes into these scores in a second. And my pace of aging is a 0.7. And by the way, you might see April 2025 dates here, but I confirmed with the co-founder that these were actually, it was a processing issue at the lab and that these are the correct results. So there's the omic M age, and you can see details about each of the tests as you scroll down. I like Symphony Age better because it gives you more information into the particular organ systems, so you can see what's going on. I had one that was out of range, and they give you information about which biomarkers go into the scoring of each of the different systems. You can see how your pace of aging compares to the general population and male and female cohorts. And then you can look at different facets of overall health. Here's immunity, and there are a couple that are out of balance. Basophils, naive B cells, and then eosinophils. Makes sense because a dry fast is going to impact the immune system, as we'll see in a minute. Telomeres, according to Self-Decode, I am predisposed to shorter telomeres, so it's nice to see that my telomere biological age is still below my chronological age, but it gives me an area to continue to work, and I already do a lot of lifestyle practices and use Pidolon occasionally to help keep my telomeres elongated. The TruAge test also does provide some useful biomarkers aside from just your biological age, so you can see how you stack up with things such as inflammation. I really discount the fit age because this doesn't seem to me to be very accurate. I don't know how they come up with this. My grip strength is certainly not in the 43rd or 47th percentile. Gait speed I'd also assume is inaccurate because I'm a fast walker. Same way with VO2 max. My last test put me, I think it was 56, and that's an approximation, but a lot of different devices have approximated my VO2 max at 56. I don't train VO2 max at all anymore, so I don't think I would be below 50. This looks like it's 48 or so. I don't think that's right. These seem to be about accurate. Smoking and alcohol risk. Then you get what they call epigenetic biomarker proxies. These are things that are typically measured in blood serum, but you can understand a bigger snapshot, a bigger picture of these different biomarkers. So as you'll see, my HbA1c, which is a 3-month snapshot of average blood sugar levels, is 40%. And in my Function Health labs, you'd see a slightly different number, and you get these for different things. So the issue with traditional blood labs, a lot of times you get a single snapshot in time, and it might not be indicative of long-term health. It could just be that you slept poorly one night before, or you did one thing right before the test, and that results in wildly skewed biomarkers. I like this form of testing because you get an extra data point to understand a bigger picture across a lot of different biomarkers. Some blood labs do measure a longer term snapshot, but a lot of the metabolites and things that are measured, especially in blood serum, do not. If you supplement creatine, you might see high creatinine on your blood panel, but here, even though I supplement it and have been supplementing 10 to 15 grams per day for 10 years, you can see it comes back in the normal range here because I don't necessarily have an issue, but my traditional blood labs do flag it that way if I have taken creatine close to the test. All right, that is my TruAge report. Then we'll go on to another epigenetic methylation test called AgeRate. And you'll see here that my biological age is older than my chronological age. Here it is 32.05. And my main issue with this test is you don't know why. It tells you different scores, and as you'll see, I have mainly great scores for telomere health. I have great scores for chronic inflammation. I have average scores for immune health. So I have to assume this is where my high biological age and their test comes from, because this is only average. But then you'll see my metabolic health is great. My frailty resistance is great. My cognitive resilience is great. And my balanced diet is also great. Then my tobacco smoke exposure is also great. So as you can see, that's all the information we have. We don't know why my biological age is so high. I have to assume it's because of my one average score, but there's no negative scores here. There's no below average scores. So I'm not sure why my biological age is 32 here. It's not the most actionable either. So personally, I prefer TruAge over AgeRate, also because TruAge uses open source algorithms, so the scientific community can weigh in and give feedback and understand how they come to those scores. Then we'll go to my other TruDiagnostic report, and that is TruHealth. This focuses on epigenetic biomarker proxies, EBPs. So it's still looking at blood, but unlike blood labs, it looks at the methylation patterns of each of the biomarkers. What's interesting is that you'll see certain things that are out of range here, such as amino acids and lipid peroxidation. And this is despite me supplementing amino acids and me focusing on reducing lipid peroxidation. It makes me think that this test was drastically affected by my dry fast just before, because these things are otherwise non-issues for me. So we can actually look and see what these are. Vitamin A, the way this key works is that you have green being optimal and you have the gray bar as out of reference range. So 12% is just slightly over 10%, meaning that my vitamin A isn't critically low, but it's on the lower end. So you can see very easily what's out of balance. So for me, that would be inositol and vitamin A. I supplement high dose vitamin C, but during a dry fast or any high stress event, you burn through ascorbate much faster. So it would make sense that it would be a little low. And my genetics predispose me to difficulties with methylation, and not just the MTHFR gene, but others as well. I supplement betaine, or TMG as it's sometimes called, and I'm not surprised that it was on the low end. This was before I started supplementing it. And so you can see there's other things that are involved in the methylation process that are also low, not extremely low, but lower than they could and should be. And it's interesting to see some amino acids that are out of balance because I also supplement amino acids every single day, essential amino acids. And this is probably because during a fast, your body burns amino acids to run gluconeogenesis and power itself. So I was really curious to see what would happen to my fatty acid profile and my lipids immediately following a dry fast, because that's one of the main fuels for the body during a long-term fast, and to produce metabolic water, as the Russian researchers call it. The glycerol backbone in fatty acids is important for the gluconeogenesis process. So unsurprisingly, I saw some big variation in my Function Health labs. I saw that my lipids were off more than they usually are. I had more of the small and dense LDL, which are atherogenic and undesirable. I also had a lower percentage of omega-3 fatty acids like EPA and DHA in my blood. But here we can see that although DPA is a little lower than it could be, there's actually not much of an issue with omega status overall. Omega-6 is really high, and linoleic acid is pretty high considering that I consume a very low linoleic acid diet, and PUFA is off the charts. It is at the threshold, which is also interesting and strange because I really have a minimal consumption of PUFAs in my diet. It's mainly saturated fats. So I'm imagining that this was heavily skewed by the recent dry fast as well. If you've heard of a supplement called Fatty 15, you can see right here, C15, I have pretty decently high levels considering that I don't even supplement it. This is mainly just from consuming grass-fed raw milk. And we can see other biomarkers related to lipid metabolism and lipid oxidation and antioxidant activity are dysregulated because I just went through a very stressful event. So these I don't find very surprising. And we can also see that although my LDL particle size and count and all that looked suboptimal in my Function Health, it appears to be less of an issue here because this is the bigger snapshot. So this is a test that I would run if I was concerned about the things that were showing up in my routine blood work. And by the way, I've never had issues with lipids at all, any of the lipids. So it was interesting to see that show up on the recent standard blood labs. All right, this section I found interesting. I'm not sure if it's possible to have a 0% in this category. I don't think that's accurate because the rest of my neurocognitive markers look pretty decent. So I'd find it surprising if I really had 0% of that one. I also found this toxin section to be interesting because back before I started living a healthy lifestyle, I used Teflon cookware. I used all kinds of chemical-based skincare products. I was not careful at all about my exposure to these forever chemicals. So it's interesting that my PFOS levels are low, but my PFOA levels specifically are pretty high. And also down here, we can see glyphosate. Although I eat purely organic, unless I'm eating out and it's unavoidable, I still have decently high levels considering that I shouldn't, in theory, have any in my diet. I was also in India last year, and so I expected that my exposure to these air pollution metabolites would be higher, but apparently the amount of time I spent there didn't make it much of an issue. What's cool about this test is it also measures mitochondrial function via several different ways. So despite having no nutrition for a couple days while I was in the dry fast, my markers here looked pretty decent. And if you're taking an NAD supplement, whether it's something simple like niacin or niacinamide or nicotinamide riboside or NMN, you can see the impact of those supplements if they're actually working for you and how much is getting broken down into metabolites. I was also surprised to see that my ketone levels were very low. Granted, there could be a rebound effect after having dry fasted for a while. I'm sure my ketone levels during the dry fast were off the charts. Should have measured, but I didn't. And then perhaps there was a rebound right after that. It also could be because I took this test in a non-fasted state, although I did answer that in the questionnaire when it asked. All right, that's the thorough in-depth breakdown of this one. If you guys have used any biological age tests, which one did you use and why did you settle on that one? Drop a comment below and let us know because I'm curious. And then finally, the last detailed report that I got back was one called GlycanAge. GlycanAge measures something called glycans, as the name implies, and they use that to approximate your biological age. It's supposed to be much more resistant to lifestyle change. I had a consultation with them, and when I was talking to the expert, he mentioned that my results are likely coming from previous life experiences, such as my decade of a course of antibiotics, every year, and then living in toxic mold for a while, overtraining, all these negative lifestyle behaviors and patterns. And my score certainly reflects that. This was my worst score by a landslide. It has me at age 38, which is 8 years older than my chronological age. When I look into it, we can see that my glycan shield, which is diet, is my only good score. And that is one theme consistent across all the tests, is that my diet works well for my biology. My diet's pretty simple. It consists of eating seasonally, not excluding any one macro for long periods of time, eating whole unprocessed foods, aiming to get at least 30 grams of fiber every day, and eating just about everything, even though I go out of my way to avoid extra consumption of omega-6 fatty acids, especially in their processed and refined forms. So we can see that every other score here is worse or terrible. And when I talked to him about what can cause this, he mentioned all of the things that were part of my previous lifestyle. Overtraining is a big one they see in professional athletes and people who are serious about their fitness. They often see worse biological ages according to GlycanAge than they do in their other populations who are in the middle and have a very moderate exercise routine. They also mentioned that people that take supplements tend to have worse scores. So all in all, I'm a bit cautious and hesitant to putting all my eggs in the GlycanAge basket, because although they claim it can predict disease up to 10 years before it occurs, I'm not sure that the reference population they used for studying this applies to healthy populations looking for a little extra optimization. Because as I already mentioned, none of my other tests showed real cardiovascular risks. Even all my previous traditional blood labs have not shown any increase of cardiovascular risk. Everything from Lp(a) to ApoB to traditional lipids to genetics, nothing else puts me at increased risk. So I was surprised to see that here. And then same with metabolic markers. My metabolism seems pretty healthy by most measures, and I have no history of autoimmunity. I have no markers that are out of balance in terms of immunity. I have no markers that show that I'm at increased risk for any of these autoimmune conditions. And to me, it seems that this test, although it's not supposed to be, was indeed skewed by my recent dry fasting. All right, there you have my test results. I did get results back from Viome and Function Health, but they didn't create anything pretty that I can display very easily. So I will put those scores in the dashboard that I created here that you can see and visualize things pretty easily. And then I also have my case study here where I explained exactly what I did, how I went about it, the results, and gave you more insights into the takeaways and things that I learned from this process. So you can check these out in the description for this video. So the irony, after all of this testing, what did I find? First of all, my chronological age at the time that I took these tests was 30.4 years old. When I ran some quick back of the napkin math, my average biological age across all the tests is 30.4 years old. Then my median biological age is 30 years old. But the spread between the outliers on either side, 24.9 on the low end, up to 38 on the high end, which is a spread, a range of 13.1 years. My GlycanAge results definitely concern me a bit, and I will have to retest at some point because that's the only one that's actually alarming to me. And it might be unwarranted concern. And that's actually the issue I have with a lot of these diagnostics, is specifically that it's hard to figure out why they came up with this score. There's no way of figuring out which part of my past and when specifically led me to having such a high biological age through that test. And it's entirely possible that I'll retest and it'll be below my chronological age. That would be a couple months of concern over nothing. And we know that concern has very negative impacts on the immune system and the overall aging process. So for most people, is this useful? Kind of. What I would continue to do is the standard 1 to 2 times per year blood work. And then occasionally I would layer on a TruAge test. I find that one to be the most accurate, the most insightful, the most well validated. And if I could only choose one of these tests in addition to standard blood work, it would probably be that one. If you're a big supplementer or you want to understand your cellular health and your biochemistry a little more, perhaps the TruHealth test would make sense. But to me, the TruAge test is more actionable and gives you more information, making it the better option for most people. For the non-experimenters, I'm imagining that the price of these tests is only going to continue to go down. So if you hang on and wait it out, you might be able to get these tests for a lot cheaper in the near future. Thanks again to the companies for providing the kits I use to test their products. If you guys want to use the code URBAN, I believe it is for most of them, that will save you on your order. If you made it this far, go ahead and drop a 1% in the comments below. Not many people make it through an entire long YouTube video like this these days. I want to know who you are. Until next time, be an outlier.